Welcome, 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 welcome. So glad to be with you all today. It's been a lovely afternoon. The weather in New York City is delightful today. It's just after 5:20. It's like 5:22, 5:23, something like that. PM Eastern Standard Time. I'm coming to you from Manhattan, and I am here to engage with you for yet another afternoon conversation. So welcome, everybody. It's always fun to talk to all of you. Always fun to talk to all of you. So be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, because YouTube does sometimes, the YouTube algorithms do unsubscribe people. We don't want that. We want you all to stay subscribed. On top of that, we want you to hit the notifications bell. Hit the notifications bell because we want you all to be up to date on things. And we want you all to find out. Sometimes I do these streams, like today, on not very long notice. Today, I gave it about an hour's notice. I had a great reading session with the John Brown volunteers and some friends. Got to meet some folks. Shout out to Chaya, who happens to be in town, a good friend of our streams here. Shout out to Julia, who also joined us. Wow, it was great today. The John Brown volunteers are doing great work. We had a great study session. They are out spreading the revolutionary message like they do every day. And I'm so proud of those kids. You don't know how proud of those kids I am. They're doing great work. And but I'm on here, and we're about to have a great conversation. KMT fascist? ? All right. And like I said, shoot me a super chat. The way we do it here, the show is in 3 parts. First part is my opening remarks. Second part of the show, after my opening remarks, second part of the show after my opening remarks. Strategies to fight. After my opening remarks, we then do the roll call. And then after that, after we do the roll call, then I answer your super chats for the rest of the program. American public schools do not teach reading skills. What are reading skills? Tips. So there you go. That's how we do it here. First, my opening remarks, then roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. Then for the rest of the program, I answer your super chat questions. That's how we do things. It's a lot of fun. We always have a great time here. So there you go. Spread 21st century socialism. Habits to avoid. To avoid. Good super chat. Writing them all down, and that's how we work. So keep the super chats rolling in. I will answer your super chat questions as they come. And I will not answer them as they come. First, I give my opening remarks, then we do the roll call, then I do the super chats. That's how it works here on this YouTube channel. So glad to engage with all of you. It's great fun. So on that note, folks, I'm going to begin my opening remarks. So every so often, some truth about China gets through in mainstream media. Rarely, right? Rarely. But every so often, in the process of attacking China, they are forced to admit some things about China that don't really strengthen their arguments. When it comes to China, the U.S. media in its campaign to demonize and isolate China, basically has two messages. For conservatives, the message is that China is a brutal, authoritarian, communist government. Mike Pompeo referred to China as a Marxist-Leninist state. And their message is China does bad stuff, and China is communist, and liberals are also communist, and therefore anyone who supports communism is supporting China. Anyone who supports China is supporting communism. Communism is bad. USA won the Cold War. Communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Communism bad. Communism horrible. Communism evil. The same stuff we've heard our whole lives. That's the message for conservatives, right? Conservatives think Joe Biden is a communist. Conservatives are being told China is communist. Communism is pure evil, they tell us, and China is communism, therefore hate China because China communist, right? That's the message to conservatives. That's what Tim Pool is putting out. That's what you find on Fox News. That's what you find on in the Wall Street Journal, and you find in other conservative publications. That's generally the attitude toward China. However, for liberals, they obviously have to have a very different message, because right now in liberal circles, there is a renewed interest in socialism. And I put that in quote marks because if you talk to these folks, they think socialism is Norway and Sweden. They think socialism is the post office. They will say things like the USA is already half socialist because we have Social Security and labor unions. And that among liberals, there is a renewed interest in social democratic concepts. So it's very hard to play up this, we should hate China because China is communist. That message doesn't really go over, especially when conservatives are constantly accusing Joe Biden and AOC and all of them of being communists and Marxists. If you then tell them that China is communist and Marxist, that tends to make them think of China in a positive light. They say, look, we're constantly being called communists. If China is communist, maybe that means we're like China. They don't want to make that connection. And so for the last several years, the New York Times, which appeals to liberals, has very much been on a kick of trying to create a gap between China and Western liberals and leftists. For example, there was a really nasty hit piece on China's healthcare system done by the New York Times. They claimed that all these people were waiting in line to get healthcare in China. Well, Nathan Rich, the great internet journalist, Nathan Rich exposed that was a mistranslation. Those people were not waiting in line to see a doctor. They were waiting in line to see a specialist for a same-day appointment, right? If they wanted to see a regular doctor, there was no line. If they wanted to see a specialist and make an appointment, they could do that as well. But they were in line. That line of people that the New York Times reported was a line of people waiting to get health care in China. That was a line of people that were lined up to see a specialist on the same day. And so they were lying. They were just straight up lying. They were mistranslating what people said, knowing that most American viewers don't speak Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. Mistranslating what people said. It was just a very deceptive piece of journalism. But why did they pick the issue of healthcare to criticize China around? Why the issue of healthcare? Well, they picked the issue of healthcare because that's very important to the Bernie Sanders crowd. That's very important to liberals, right? This whole call for a Medicare for all system, healthcare for all, healthcare is a right, is big important to liberals. So if you want liberals to hate China, you don't attack China by calling it communist. You say China doesn't provide good healthcare. Well, I'm sorry, but it's the Chinese Communist Party that created the barefoot doctors program in the 1950s and brought medical professionals to villages that had never had it. It's because of the Chinese Communist Party that China today has a modern healthcare system. The Chinese Communist Party has brought access to healthcare to hundreds of millions of people who never had it before. And there are, amazing breakthroughs in health technology happening because of the Chinese Communist Party. So that's deceptive propaganda. Another thing that the New York Times will do is they constantly highlight the arresting of Marxists in China. China is a country of hundreds of millions of people. It's at this point, I believe it's a country of 1 billion people. And in a country that is that large, the notion where communism, let me keep in mind, communism, Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory is the official state ideology. Of course, there are going to be people who get arrested who profess communism. Just like here in America, there are people who get arrested who profess American democracy and capitalism, right? You know, when they arrest some Wall Street guy for insider trading, no one reports capitalist arrested in the United States because it's not assumed he's arrested for his ideology. Most people in the United States believe in capitalism. So therefore, when one of them gets arrested, it's not big news. Well, in China, every so often, there's somebody who professes to be a Marxist who gets arrested. And the New York Times will report this as Marxist student arrested, Marxist activist arrested. Well, I mean, that's not a lie. I'm sure that it happened, but I don't think they were arrested for believing in Marxism, as Marxism is the official ideology. Could be they were arrested for engaging in illegal demonstrations and disruptions. Could be that they were arrested for something that has nothing to do with politics. We don't know the details, but the New York Times will report it that way, with the intention of getting American leftists and dissidents to feel like China is their enemy. The New York Times plays up the idea that China is a free market capitalist country, whereas the Wall Street Journal plays up the idea that China is a communist country. If you're a conservative, China is communist. If you are a liberal, China is free market capitalist or fascist. Basically, the demonization of China is done specifically based on what your political beliefs already are. They can't get their story straight. Is China capitalist or is China not capitalist? Is China, capitalist or not? Is China socialist or not? They cannot get their story straight because they don't know what to tell. The American people are polarized around these issues, and so they can't get their story straight. So that's why there was a letter that was published in the Wall Street Journal, which is a conservative outlet, that I actually appreciated. And the Wall Street Journal published this letter to the editor recently, which is pretty good. I saw that Haas of the infrared community tweeted it out. And I thought, since it's a short letter that was published in the Wall Street Journal, I would just read to you what was said. This was by Robert Atkinson, PhD, President of Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And this is what he wrote. The headline is, China's state capitalism is not capitalism. The purpose of Chinese firms is to fulfill the goals of the Communist Party. Joseph C. Sternberg describes how China played American investors by preventing them from owning most Chinese companies. Instead, investors are allowed to buy into opaque offshore holding companies. It is mechanisms like this that have led many in the West to fall for the Chinese Communist Party's assertion that China practices capitalism with Chinese characteristics. But as Mr. Sternberg notes, real capitalism is more than the presence of private companies. It is a system in which shareholders can control the management of companies. By that definition, China is far from having a capitalist economy, for Chinese capitalism is a system in which the purpose of firms is to fulfill the goals of the Chinese Communist Party. Let's underline this. System in which the purpose of firms is to fulfill the goals of the Chinese Communist Party. Increasingly, party officials are part of Chinese companies to make sure they follow the law, a euphemism for following the dictates of the party. Let me repeat that. Increasingly, party officials are part of Chinese companies to make sure the company follows the law, a euphemism for following the dictates of the party. Mr. Sternberg is right to mention that U.S. investors not only have few rights, they have limited insights into the inner workings of firms, do not undergo public audits reviewed by U.S. regulators. As such, it is high time for the Securities and Exchange Commission to ban the listing of Chinese firms on the American exchanges, blah, 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 for Congress to require delisting of existing Chinese firms. So he's an anti-China fanatic. He's an anti-China lobbyist. He wants the U.S. Congress to remove Chinese companies from the stock market. But in doing that, he's forced to admit that China is not capitalist. What is the difference between capitalism and socialism? And forgive me for sounding like a broken record here. If you watch these streams, sometimes we get a little bit repetitive. I say the same thing over and over and over again, and I apologize for that. But sometimes it's because you all ask the same super chats, which, again, you guys make the show. But sometimes it's because it's a point that bears repeating. It is a point that bears repeating. And that point bears repeating. This point bears repeating. What is the difference between capitalism and socialism? Well, the most important book on this topic is called Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, written by Frederick Engels. It's a very short book, 3 chapters, and in that book, Frederick Engels explains the difference between capitalism and socialism. Capitalism is a system of production organized for profit. Socialism is when the means of production function for the benefit of all society. How did China get Western companies to agree to transfer their technology? Countries to agree to transfer technology. Frederick Engels described capitalism, saying, under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital, meaning that things only get done so that capitalists can make profits from it. Mao Zedong, he said, capitalism is profits in command. But socialism is the elimination of capitalism. It's when the means of production are organized to serve public good and not profits. Frederick Engels talks about production upon a predetermined plan, addressing the problem of child labor in the U.S. within private contractor sector. Thoughts on how perpetrators skilled versus unskilled children, right? Child labor in the USA, right? Your favorite movies. Alrighty. So there you go. The difference between capitalism and socialism is under capitalism, the means of production operate to make profits for private owners. Under socialism, the means of production are carried out and function according to a predetermined plan. The working class, as representative of all societies, takes control of the means of production. And as Mr. Robert Atkins, PhD, President of Information and Technology Innovation, points out, the purpose of the firms is to fulfill the goals of the party. The private firms that exist in China fulfill the goals of the party, and party officials are part of these companies and make sure they follow the law, i.e., a euphemism for following the dictates of the party. Private companies in China exist because the Chinese Communist Party wants them to exist, and they do what the Chinese Communist Party wants them to do. That is not capitalism. Capitalism is production organized for profit. And if the firms and businesses and private companies are not functioning and doing what they think is profitable, but instead doing what an organization with 90 million members that is based in every neighborhood, called the Chinese Communist Party, tells them to do, that ain't capitalism. It is not capitalism, right? You can have free health care, and it's still capitalism. You can have progressive taxation, and it's still capitalism. But if the means of production are being organized to serve public good and not profits, if there is a centrally planned economy in which a government that comes out of a popular mobilization and has a well-organized base forces the economy to work in the interests of society overall, that ain't capitalism. China is not a capitalist country. And folks who do business, like the folks who put out the Wall Street Journal, they know this. Unfortunately, it's the left that doesn't understand this. And so, our work is cut out for us. But I just wanted to highlight this little bit from the Wall Street Journal. I don't want to get into that, Pierre. I apologize. I don't want to highlight people like that. There's not a, well, actually, you know what? I'll passingly mention on it, right? I'll passingly mention that, all right? But you're going to get like a 2-sentence answer, or like you'll get a brief anecdote, okay? I'll touch on that very briefly, but it's not really worth our time. So that's the first thing I wanted to raise. The next thing I wanted to mention, just because it's something to mention, right? Again, this is not a big speech. I'm not epically giving you all a big presentation. I'm just, telling you a couple things that are on my mind. Ann Coulter. Do folks know Ann Coulter? Ann Coulter is a conservative commentator. Her first book was a book against Bill Clinton. It was called, what was it called? It was like The Case, High Crimes and Misdemeanors, The Case Against William Jefferson Clinton. And then she wrote a book called Slander. And then she wrote a book called Treason. And she during the Bush years especially, she would get on Fox News and talk smack about liberals. She wrote books against liberals. She was a conservative who would say things that were controversial and would get her lots of attention. She's blonde-haired, very good-looking, and she was just a conservative commentator who got a lot of attention. I've always, I found her to be interesting. And, when Obama became president, she wrote a book called Mugged, Liberals and Reality or whatever. And her books are very formulaic, and they are not very deep. They tend to just be examples of liberals being hypocritical, liberals, it's just, example after example after example of liberals in America being corrupt, liberals lying as if that never happens. That's Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter is, she's just Ann Coulter. But what's interesting about Ann Coulter, and I just thought we would touch on this because why not, right? Well, first of all, let me say that Ann Coulter is kind of, her career is not in great shape right now. The reason being that, her whole message was support George W. Bush and the war on terror, or else you were a traitor to your country. It was during the Bush years. If you didn't support the invasion of Iraq, if you didn't support, wiretapping people's phones and torture at Guantanamo, then you were a traitor and you needed to move to some other country. Her message was obey authority, obey the government, obey the police. Anti-war protesters need to be waterboarded and tortured and executed, and, all the leftists and the Democrats are all a bunch of communist traitors to the United States. It was just typical neocon authoritarianism, right? It was support for U.S. foreign policy and the neoconservatives, support for policing agencies and political repression in the United States, demonization of leftists as traitors and un-American and all of that. That's Ann Coulter. Well, nowadays, the right wing has changed. Look, Donald Trump, who said that the invasion of Iraq was based on lies, he was president. He was a Republican president, and he said, he turned to Jeb Bush and said, your brother lied. He lied us into a war. Everybody knows it. So what is she going to do, right? Her whole thing, her whole career was telling people that anyone who said, that Bush had lied was a traitor who should be locked up. So there you go, historical figures. So how do you deal with that? Now the right wing is taking kind of a populist turn. So we've seen Ann Coulter try to, try to remain relevant, try to, stay in the media spotlight. She's tried to become a little bit more of a Nigel Farage character. She's been talking about immigration. She was a supporter of Donald Trump, and then she got mad at Donald Trump. She felt he betrayed her, and I don't know. So Ann Coulter, she's becoming less and less relevant. We're hearing less and less about Ann Coulter, right? Because neoconservatism is on its way out. But actually, other than, Ann Coulter saying, at one point she said women shouldn't be able to vote because they're too liberal, other than her saying these wildly controversial things, other than that, right, I think at one point she said that, this American Muslim guy they arrested in Afghanistan should get the death penalty, quote, so liberals know they can get the death penalty. Other than saying unpleasant things, that Islam should be outlawed and, just your typical provocative Ben Shapiro-ish kind of statements. Other than saying that, there's not much more to her. But there is actually. There's a little known fact about Ann Coulter that slipped into the media. When the movie Bridge of Spies came out, have you ever seen this movie Bridge of Spies? Came out 5 or 6 years ago, stars Tom Hanks. When the movie Bridge of Spies came out, a couple websites like one or two little websites, did a news item about how one of the characters portrayed in that movie, that historical film, Bridge of Spies, one of the characters in that film was Ann Coulter's father. Ann Coulter's father was Jack Coulter. And Jack Coulter was the leader of the FBI's anti-communism division. Let me repeat that. Ann Coulter's father was Jack Coulter, the leader of the FBI's anti-communism division, a big player in the COINTELPRO operations. We know about COINTELPRO, the murder of revolutionary black activists, infiltration of the Communist Party, etc. Ann Coulter's father was a very high-ranking bios of Stalin. A very high-ranking figure in the FBI who oversaw the COINTELPRO operations. And when I learned this news, it was actually quite a big revelation for me, because for years, there had been an inside joke. A lot of liberals thought that Ann Coulter was actually a liberal who was like doing a caricature of a crazy, deranged conservative. I had a running joke with a few friends that she was secretly a Maoist third worldist who was trying to make the right wing more extreme in order to help third world revolution. It was just kind of an inside joke. Well, now we know the truth. Ann Coulter was not a secret liberal trying to make liberals look insane. Right? Mika Brzezinski, we'll talk about that.